This time on Graveyard Carz.
An engine that basically grenaded from the inside out.
Can the ghouls resurrect a 71 Cuda and save its numbers-matching 383 engine?
Historically speaking, that's the end of that block.
With multiple major freeze cracks.
This side's much worse.
Will a new shop have what it takes to save this numbers engine?
All the things function after this shop is done with this engine. He will be able to maintain the original numbers matching engine in the 71 Cuda.
But as expenses mount and with no guarantees.
I'll do it for you, and I'm charging you for it. But I cannot guarantee the repair. This is on you.
Will the cost and the risk outweigh the value of saving this numbers matching 383?
We know that the value of the car with the numbers matching engine is so much more than without the numbers matching engine. I think it's worth the gamble.
Coming up on this episode of Graveyard Carz.
Graveyard Carz is filmed before a live studio audience. One of the cars that we're working on right now is going to feel a little bit like deja vu to you at home because it's a 1971 Cuda GB5 Blue, just like the Phoenix Cuda. But it's different. This is a nice little car. It was a factory 383, automatic on the floor, console, buckets, leather interior, rally instrument cluster, just a really good car to start with. This car is numbers matching engine, but not numbers matching transmission, which is a lot smaller of a detail than the numbers matching engine. We do have a date coded one for it, ready to go in. But overall, a really great starting point. One of the things about this car is it sat for a long time, I believe, in a very, very cold part of the United States. So cold that it freezes there. Now, Tony and I talked about this not long ago about preserving a car and storing it correctly. This is another example of something that didn't get stored correctly because while it was in that freezing weather, it didn't have antifreeze in it. So the block we have discovered is broken. So what happened to the block was it was stored in a way that allowed water to get into the cylinder, so that's bad. That'll mean that we're going to end up having to bore it over quite a bit, maybe even put a sleeve in it. But that's okay, we've done that before many times. What isn't good about the way it was stored was it was stored with no antifreeze in it. Typically speaking, when you come up with a broken block as a result of a freeze crack, unless it's some minor little hairline crack, that's the end of the engine. These areas are provisions that the manufacturer put into the block so when something stupid happens, if it gets way too hot or way too cold and the water either boils and expands or it freezes and it expands, it should kick out these freeze plugs, soft plugs. In this case, it didn't kick them out. When the water froze, it expanded, and when it expanded, it pushed that cast iron block out. You can see that there's a pucker to it. It did the exact same thing on this side. You can see that water got in there. This side's much worse. This side you can actually see how far it's busted up out of the way. So these two areas here are the areas that got broken. Historically speaking, that's the end of that block. But we want to try something different on this. I've got a company that I've been sending stuff to do some small cast iron welding. I told them about this one. They're willing to take it on. I wanted you, the viewers, to see what is involved in it, and you'll ride right along to see if it actually works or not. If this does work and the engine's able to run and hold water, not overheat, and have oil pressure, if all the things function after this shop is done with this engine, he will be able to maintain the original numbers matching engine in a 71 Cuda. Numbers matching means that the engine and transmission started life on the assembly line in that car, and they have the vehicle identification number stamped into them that matches the car. These are the cars that are called pure cars, no excuse cars. These are the cars that will sell for the most amount of money and in the shortest period of time because they are a no excuses car. So a good example of that is the big dollar 71 Hemi Cuda that sold at the Mecum auction a few years ago for $3.5 million. The reason that sold for $3.5 million wasn't just that it was a 71 Hemi Cuda convertible. They made 11 of them, and some of those have sold for a lot less money than that. This one sold because everything was right about it. Original engine, original transmission, no excuses, good colors, and it was a 4-speed. Those are all the things that drive this market. So that's why numbers matching and preserving a numbers matching engine is so important.
So we've done a tribute Superbird before using the Janik parts. So we're doing a tribute Daytona. You guys remember we did the Hellbird a few seasons back. We had Ryan, our technician, do it. And the craftsmanship that he did on that tribute car with the final fit and finish of that car was second to none, and that car looked like an original, minus the engine, I get it, looked like an original Superbird. So when it came time to do the Daytona, we did the exact same thing with Shane, doing the exact process, and the end result is gonna be the same as the last time.
Now, if you guys recall back to our Superbird when we converted it, that's the Plymouth Superbird, and of course the other wing car is the Dodge Daytona Charger. Now, the reason I mentioned the Superbird is because we're doing a Daytona right now. And another reason I mentioned the Superbird is we're using the same company, Janik, that provided us with the Superbird replacement conversion pieces on this Daytona. Putting these parts on the car and starting with a good part, not just something that sort of looks like it, but is right for the car, is very important. And that's why I wanted to share all the things we had to do to convert these pieces to go onto the car. So this is our original 1970 Charger fender, just the way it was made at the manufacturer. The things I want to point out that need to be converted for this fender to go onto a Daytona. One is, you see the 70 Charger side marker opening. That's a nice original side marker opening, and it would take the lamp in it for the 1970 Charger. The valance panel that you see would go through here real nicely, intersects with this part of the fender, which is just a stationary part. This right here, this metal is built into this fender. This is what a 70 Charger fender looks like. But we have to change some of that because of the Daytona. Now on the other fender, this fender has been modified. This has already had all the changes necessary to be able to put it onto a Daytona. So if you look at the side marker opening in comparison to the side marker opening on the original 70 Charger fender, you see this is welded up. That's because the valance panel for the Daytona has the side marker in it, and I'll show you that in a minute. The other thing is the valance that goes on a Daytona is wide. That's what this huge monstrous gray thing is here. That's actually a lower valance panel. It has to go all the way across this opening. So what we had to do is on the original fender over there is we had to cut that out. We had to cut it a little bit long from where we were going to fold it up into place so that when you look at the back here, you can see we now have a lip to bolt that onto. Here, when I hold it up into place, you can clearly see that it fits that plane now, that you can put the J-bolts in it and hold it into place. You also see that our new Daytona valance has the hole in it for the side marker. If this piece of metal were here, like it is on the original fender over there, and I tried to bring it in, you're gonna see I got a problem. Now another thing, of course, the Daytona gets is these scoops on the tops of the fenders. These come in the kit from Janik right here. That's pretty much clean it up, sand it down, make sure it fits nice, and you're ready to paint that. But what's underneath it, doing that correctly and emulating the original one. So here you see this is original metal with the right pattern and the right grid. I don't know what those numbers are, but Shane, who put this on there, got in the book and found out what they were, and we ordered some of that material, cut it to fit, and then we used our car liner spot welder to spot weld it in place. So it absolutely looks 100% factory. Now he'll have to do the other one here shortly that needs the conversion on it, but for right now, that's what that looks like. The only other thing to talk about are the headlight bucket modifications that have to be made on a Daytona from a regular Charger. In addition to cutting off the small section there on the fender so that it'll accept the valance, you have to also remove the headlight buckets because 69 Dodge Charger had hideaway headlights, had real 4 headlight system in it. That is different than the Daytona, which pops up as a hideaway concealed headlight and sets out considerably further than the factory one. So removing that and making it look correctly in there, so if somebody down the road looked at that fender, they go, wow, that must have been an original Daytona fender. Those are the things that are a real claim to fame for us, and we pay attention to the minutia. What I want to show you was this headlight mounting bucket that you see right here. This is the factory mounting bucket that would take the 2 headlights and all the wiring would go in behind it. A Daytona, because of the flip-up headlights on it and the design, doesn't need this. The headlights themselves, the concealed headlights, they house the buckets in it. So what we have to do, you can see, is take this unit, drill out all of the spot welds so that when we're done, we have a nice clean finish. But that's kind of the 1, 2, 3s of how the front sheet metal, not going into the nose cone, which is a whole nother thing, but kind of an idea how that front sheet metal from the fender standpoint to valance have to be converted to be able to work. The machine shop called and said that our block with the busted intake valley has more problems than that. It's got freeze cracks around the center freeze plugs at the side of the block. It's weird, right? Because it's supposed to kick out the freeze plug. That's the whole point behind an expansion plug or a freeze plug, is when that water expands, it'll push that plug out, and that's where it will get its ability to expand, not the block. In this case, I think the freeze plugs were probably rusted in place. It couldn't kick them out, and so what did it do? It swelled that block up until it cracked. So now we've not only got a busted up intake valley area, very badly busted up, but we also happen to have busted out areas on both sides of the block around the freeze plugs. It's interesting because the broken area in the valley is the same on both sides in the same area, meaning they're just horizontally opposed to each other. One side is a little bit worse than the other one, but they're in the same area of the block. The real downside to this is the shop is saying they're not able to tap that metal back down and weld it or drill the end of the crack and stop it and repair it. They literally have to cut out an area where all that broken metal is and weld in, graft in a new piece of cast iron. Now let me tell you one of the big risks to all of this. The shop that's doing the welding said, listen, I can't guarantee anything. I'll do it for you and I'm charging you for it. But I cannot guarantee the repair. This is on you, Mark. If you want to take a chance, we'll take a chance and try to do it. But if that thing overheats, if it cracks, if it swells out, if it doesn't have oil pressure, if it doesn't run right, it's on you. I'll just make the effort to do it. To me, I think it's worth the gamble because we know that the value of the car with the numbers matching engine is so much more than without the numbers matching engine. I think it's worth the gamble. When the guy at the shop started talking about how they're going to repair this, it was fascinating to me. I wish I could have gone up and watched it. They have to get this into a chamber where that cast iron is incredibly hot. You'll look at the guy's hands and they have these asbestos gloves on and everything looks super hot because it is. They've got a blanket around the engine trying to keep it cool and keep it from distorting while they're welding in this area. But I guess the trick to cast iron is it has to be incredibly hot. You have to have the right everything, the right material, donor material, the right heat, the right temperature, the right ambient temperature. So it's really a bit of a science and fascinating to see. So at this point, the shop has all of the welding done on it. They welded up both of the intake valleys, they welded up the side of the block. The bad part is when they did this, because so much heat was generated that we had a twisted block. So when it went over to the machine shop, and again, same report I got from that guy, I'm not guaranteeing anything. I can't guarantee a darn thing. I will try to save this engine for you. And so when it's twisted like that, they have to lock it down into this jig, kind of like we do in our frames, and redo the line bore for the camshaft, for the crankshaft, untwist the engine, straighten it all back out again. And it's just hard to even imagine that you could do that. Now, one of the things they had to do along this process is after they got it all straightened out, they were able to bore at 40 thousandths over, which is great. I thought we were going to end up having to have sleeves in it. Another thing that they had to do was to put bronze guides in where all the lifters go, in the lifter guide area. And he told me that they're not even Mopar sizes, they're actually big block Chevy sizes. And it's something they do on big block Chevys. After it was all straightened out, they had to bore it out so far that it wouldn't take a Mopar lifter, so they put this bronze guide in there. And that's what it runs up and down on. But overall, I've never seen an engine ever in my life get that much engine work, that much stuff done to it at one time. So the good news is we do have the engine back from the machine shop, back from being welded up. Like I said, it was a complete mess. If you look at it during the process, you thought, man, there's no way. Right now, it looks good. I mean, even cosmetically, the repairs look good. On the outside of the block where the freeze cracks were around the expansion plugs, they cosmetically dressed that up real nice, gave it a texture, and you can't tell. Once that's painted, you'd never know that thing had a crack on the block. The intake valley, until the intake manifold goes on, yes, you can see the outside footprint of the repairs, but absolutely fantastic job. Now, if you recall, I mentioned because of the distortion to the block and it was all around the lifter area that they had to put the bronze bushings in there, the bronze guides. So you can see clearly that they stick up a little further than the factory ones. That doesn't matter, there's not an interference problem there. But if you watch that lifter itself, it is a really nice, tight fit. Probably tighter than it would have been against the cast iron. Now, whether or not it's gonna work, we're not out of the woods. Just because it looks great doesn't mean it's gonna work. So Doug's gotta get that thing put together.
Okay, so as soon as the engine came back, Mark handed it off to me for assembly so that I could get this thing put together, assembled, and on the run stand as quickly as possible. Since there was such a sense of urgency on this engine, I figured I'd enlist Brian's help to come over from assembly and help me put this engine together. So Brian is our new assembly tech here, and he's showing real promise. So I wanted to give him an opportunity to see how we put these engines together and why some of the things that we put on an engine have to be put on in a certain order.
I was absolutely thrilled when Dougie asked me to help assemble the 383. I've always loved cars, and I've actually built a few engines on my own. Of course, they were always Chevrolets or Brand X crap boxes, as Mark likes to call them. I was always a super fan of the show, actually, so I've watched all the old episodes of Graveyard Carz, and I always thought to myself, it would be amazing to actually learn from Dougie. He's such a great teacher.
I am going to set the head on there. Just like that. That's what we like. Yeah, so we got our Highland bolts here.
That's a Highland bolt?
That's a Highland bolt.
Yeah, how do you know that?
Well, it's an H. So we have to remember to put our wire holders on.
That's right. Just like that.
When I'm assembling the engine, I put both heads on. 17 bolts per head. I torque them down in 2 stages. I start with 45 pounds per square inch on one side, same on the other. Then I up the torque to 75 pounds per square inch and I go over all 34 head bolts again. This is our first engine build.
It is.
Together.
It's exciting, isn't it?
It is.
So we're gonna do this 68 times.
You had to say that. I am already confused. Okay,
There it is.
I like to go over them one more time. 64
We're gonna do this
times?
102 times, Doug.
Now look, Dougie's confused. I don't blame him. I'm confused as a listener. All right? I dropped out in 9th grade. I get it. I had reasons to drop out in the 9th grade. But last time I checked, it didn't matter when you graduated or when you dropped out or whatever happened. Math is still math, right? You'll see what I'm talking about. Let's just take a little dive down there on Professor Hilke's math lesson for the day. Professor Brian Hilke tells us that by the time Doug is doing preliminary torque, final torque, and then double checking the torque on both cylinder heads, he's going to have torqued a bolt 102 times. Fair enough? So let's do the math on that. 383 and a 440 have 17 head bolts on each side. Doug makes a pass through there at 35, 45 pounds. It's an initial torque. So he does both sides. Each side gets 17. 17 and 17 is 34. Is that fair, Pete? Yes, sir. It's very fair, right? You don't argue with that. Now we come back through, we readjust the torque wrench, and we go to 85 pounds. That's your final torque. Now, Doug's going to torque one side to 85 pounds, 17 bolts, and the other side, 85 pounds, 17 bolts. So we have 34 on the first pass, 34 on the second pass. That's 68. I'm okay with that. Then Doug wants to go around and double check them one more time, he tells Brian. I want to double check them. I want to make sure they're still at 85. So he's got to go around one head 17 more times. And he's got to go around another head 17 times. Last time I checked, 34 and 68 isn't 102. So maybe they ought to send him back to school. I think he was a teacher or something.
Mark, that's right. 68 plus 34 equals 102.
Yeah, no, the math's right. I'm not saying the math's not right. Had nothing to do with the math, all right? This was more about the fact that I like to double check that primary torque, all right? At 35, 45 pounds, that initial one, I like to double check that before I just go, willy-nilly and start putting 85 pounds on. So if you did that math and you added 34, 17 for each side, to the 102, you would have 136, I believe is the correct answer.
I'm gonna make you do this side.
I'll do this side.
Okay.
All right, let's do it. It's true, I was a high school teacher, and my rule was, hey, if I was gonna hand out an assignment to the kids, I wanted to double check it. And I always asked them, hey, before you turn it back into me, double check your work, double check your answers. Maybe the boss man should check his numbers twice before he goes on set. I don't know.
All right, you getting tired yet?
A little bit.
Man, you got this.
I'm trying.
I'm gonna retire soon.
I thought I retired once. And then I came to work here.
Why'd you do that?
I like building cars.
That is great. Me too. We have a pretty good crew here.
It's a good crew.
Sometimes people bring donuts.
Sometimes.
Sometimes people bring
Sometimes.
donuts. I'm not kidding.
Then
this is a great place to work.
Now on our Daytona, since I showed you what has to happen, I want to put them on the car and show you exactly how they look in position. So you know what a finished product should look like, both from a fastener standpoint and an overall view standpoint. So on our Daytona Charger, we talked about the fenders before. This is what they look like when they're on. We've got a 69 Dodge Charger body. That's how all the Daytonas started, with 70 fenders. And so the modifications that we talked about earlier, where we cut off the lower section of the fender, that's how this looks when you actually marry it up against the valance panel. It's a clean line, clean datum plate all the way across there. There's our shaved inside marker that we'll fill with filler and things like that to make it all smooth. But that's why all those provisions had to happen. You see here, he's got all the pieces welded in place with the mesh. This is identical to the original mesh pattern. Bolts right down like that. 70 Charger out here, 69 back there. Move over to here, you can see the lower valance is now in place. So if you look carefully, you'll see that we have all the bolts in place that hold the valance to the actual fender itself. And then these mounting points back here where they mount to the core support. Additionally, when that nose cone comes in, it's gonna come in like this. It's gonna butt right up against here, it's gonna set right there, and that's gonna give you your finished off nose cone pieces.
Hey Doug, we got those heads on.
We got the heads on, finally.
So what do we got going on now?
So what we're doing now is dropping in our hydraulic lifters.
Okay.
So yeah, the machine shop did a real nice job. So after we got the heads on and torqued down, the next step is to put the valve train on. So we're gonna set our greased up lifters in all these lifter bores.
And just set them in?
Uh-huh.
Okay. I bet I know what's next.
Tell me.
Those push rods?
Push rods.
Push rods.
All right.
Show me what you like to do, Doug.
Well, we like to put a little grease on the end of them.
Okay. That's
So-
why you offered me a rubber glove, isn't it?
Yeah. So one point to get across is to lubricate all moving parts when you're assembling an engine. I like to use assembly lube on the lifters, the rockers, and all other moving parts when I'm putting these engines together. It's just a good practice. Drop them right down through these little galleys.
Through the galley.
Yeah, through the galley.
Okay.
Engines like lube.
Yeah, especially when they start for the first time.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you like lube, Doug?
Look, I made a mistake on the math, okay? Sue me, but I know comedy and this silliness that they're doing over there, talking back and forth with sexual innuendos and double entendres. That's not funny. Look at my comedy. My comedy is rooted always in higher intellect type of comedy. There's always a weight of intellect behind each one of my jokes. It's not sophomoric, if I can use that word. I haven't dropped out in 9th grade. Maybe I can't. Maybe you don't want me to use that word. But I think it's sophomoric, that type of comedy. And that's exactly why I'm going to hold a comedy workshop here at Graveyard Carz. I think it's going to be a sign-up sheet. Anybody that wants to sign up and take it can. They'll learn about timing, all right? Having your own original thoughts, not just regurgitating somebody else's comedy that you saw on Saturday Night Live 30 years ago, right? Watch my comedy, and you'll see it's very cutting edge.
Here's how we do the Mopar shuffle.
Okay. Mopar shuffle.
Mopar shuffle.
Yep.
We just lay them to the outside, rocker them in, rock the bolts right down into the holes like that.
Wow, look at that. Like I said, I've built a few crap box Chevys over the years, and I've learned that Mopar is definitely unique. So watching a master like Dougie and learning from him is a wonderful opportunity. Just that little trick on the valve train would save me an hour of fighting when I have to do this myself.
Hey, look at that.
That's a clever trick. If I was doing this in my garage, I'd have probably wrestled with it for like an hour.
Dropped them on the floor.
Yep.
Run them down a little bit.
Okay.
If you want to keep your eyes on the push rods,
I will do that.
I'll bring these down a little bit. There we go. Okay.
I don't see a lot of adjustment in these.
The hydraulic lifters take up all the adjustment.
Wow,
That's the
neat.
beauty of a Mopar.
Wow, it's amazing.
Okay, so I've got this one all ready to go.
You go for it. You do that so well.
Okay.
I did notice the bolts are different lengths. Is that supposed to be the
The
case?
reason the two inner bolts are longer is because the oil comes up through passages around these two long bolts.
Okay.
Okay, now we're going to tighten these down to 35 foot-pound.
Do we have a different torque wrench?
We do.
Oh, excellent.
It's got lights on it,
Oh, wow.
like a spaceship.
Well, Doug likes his spaceships.
Doug likes spaceships. They never come and pick me up. I'm disappointed my spaceship never comes in.
still to come. With a new tribute Daytona in the wings, Mark takes charge with a detailed deep dive.
When you put that window plug in, you have to shorten up your trunk lid.
When Mark's most experienced metal tech gets hands-on with the conversion, the result could make waves.
Shane and him are modifying and making things a little bit easier for the people doing these conversions.
Meanwhile, Dougie trains Brian on building out Mopar engines.
Instead of being a $100,000 car when it's done with a non-numbers engine is $150,000. But it's only there if that engine starts up and doesn't overheat.
But a major mistake may require Mark's emergency intervention.
Always kind of expect the bad to happen.
This is an additional almost $20,000.
When Graveyard Carz returns.
Okay, so now another key component to the aerodynamics of the wing cars is the back window plug. They remove the original back glass from a 69 Charger or 70 Roadrunner, and they put this flush mount style with a smaller window in it. How to install that? What has to happen? What modifications to the body when you're converting one? All of those things are very, very important. And that's why I wanted to take a minute and show you guys how we're doing the Janik plugs on these. So on the rear window plug, you'll see that we've got this area ground down. This is for adhesion purposes. It is in between here and the area on the car at the sail panel is where we're gonna have our panel bond adhesive. Also, if you look at this trough right here, this one goes on the top of the metal piece that's on the car. This goes to the bottom of it, and then it'll have a rivet that holds it all in place. So this is a real solid area. So something I think is really cool, Shane is the body man that's working on this, and he's been talking to Grant, who's the owner of Janik Reproductions. He was pointing out to Grant, who's all ears at this point, how we could avoid maybe doing some of the welding of tabs that we had to do on our Charger. We had to weld in some different platforms for this to glue to. Whereas if he was molding this again, this rear window plug, why not mold the tabs into it with a flange, and you just go right in there and use rivets and hold it in place instead of having to weld onto the car. So they're actually, Shane and him are modifying and making things a little bit easier for the people at home that are doing these conversions. Across here, we're going to end up putting our panel bond, and across these areas here where it meets the trunk trough or the gutter. So Shane, I'm going to grab him. We're going to put all of our panel bond adhesive. We have lots of time to work with that stuff, at least an hour before it starts to even begin to kick. So we'll get everything brushed on into place, then we'll lift it up, we'll move it over to here, and we'll set it into place. And at that point, he can rivet everything and we'll be in good shape. So I think with that, I will grab him and we'll put it on. Now, another thing that has to happen when you put that window plug in, you have to shorten up your trunk lid. It's not a full-size trunk lid. I think it's around 8.5 or 9 inches that you cut off of that to be able to make the original deck lid work. When you cut that off, there's all kinds of ribs on the back side of it, and of course the top side of it that you see with your eyes when the car's going down the road, that's flat. So the part that we're getting from Janik is a really nice piece of fiberglass. It has all of the whoop-de-doos, all the rib provisions in it. It goes underneath the skin at the front, folds down, and then it gets glued into place. An interesting note here is if you go look at the original Daytona pictures that I have of ours that we did here for the Waltons, they were really crude. And there were huge gaps instead of a nice form fit, huge gaps that the new part, the reproduction part, has duplicated. And so I think that's just a really neat little detail. So if you were looking at it and you didn't have the advantage of a magnet to see if it was metal or steel, original or reproduction, you'd never know. Now to get that deck lid to fit with that new back window plug, besides cutting it down, you have to change the hinges. So there is a company making steel hinges. We bought a pair of those. They're much longer and they have more contour to them, but they allow you that articulation that you have to have. The ones that we're buying are duplicates of the originals. And with that, you pretty much have a complete Daytona conversion. So the panel bond is a two-part epoxy that works like a glue. They use it on new cars on metal, but you can also use it on the fiberglass to steel. And it is going to bond it like no other product in the world will bond it. It's a 3M product. And when that goes in there and they are clamped together, and after 24 hours, you'll never get them apart. If you wanted to take that new piece off that we just added, you'd have to chisel it off and it would destroy it. And the only thing to be left is the area that was glued on there. So it's an absolutely perfect item to use when putting these together.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to put the intake gasket in place with a little bit of a Right Stuff seal underneath it. So I'm going to run a bead of Right Stuff into the corners here, across the end rails. Okay, so after the valve train is done, the next step is to put the intake manifold. Chrysler uses a metal valley pan that seals up underneath the intake manifold. We like to use sealer underneath this valley pan to keep the oil in the engine. Nice little bead in the corners.
Okay.
And then we do that on both ends.
So are we adding any type of rubber gasket or cork gasket on top of that? Nothing, huh?
Right.
Interesting. I guess the intake might be next, huh?
Okay, we got a manifold. Okay.
This is the front of the engine here.
This is the front.
Yep.
There we go, just like that.
Yeah, just like that. Let's just freeze that frame for a second. Notice anything odd? Notice anything different about that? This is the blind leading the blind. This is what I was talking about. Nah, I'm not making up for the fact that I goofed up on the math. The intake manifold's on backwards.
This 1970 Dodge Challenger RT convertible was used in the 1994 film Natural Born Killers, starring Woody Harrelson and Juliette Lewis. It is one of 516 ever built with a 383 and an automatic transmission. It's also the subject of this week's autopsy report. Okay, so remember guys, we read the fender tag left to right, bottom to top, so let's go. Let's get started. E63, that's the 383 Magnum, which comes standard in the RT model. D32, 3-speed automatic transmission. JS27, that's the first 4 digits of the VIN, and it also means this is a Challenger RT convertible. N0B, N means 383 high performance, 0 is the model year of the car, which is 1970. B is the plant that it was built at, which is Hamtramck, Michigan. 115258. That is the serial number. All right, we're moving on to the next line up. FE5, that's the paint code, and that means bright red. HRX9, that means high price class, black leather bucket seats. 000, one-piece door interior trim panel. 904, that's the scheduled production date, so it's gonna be September 4th, 1969. 039275 is the shipping order number. All right, we move on to the next line, which starts with V3X, black convertible top. A62, that's the Rally instrument cluster, which comes standard on all the RT models. B51, power disc brakes. You don't need no book, you got me. C16, center console. C55, bucket seats. G32, right hand outside painted racing mirror. And now we're headed to that next line up. It starts with G34, which is gonna be the left hand outside painted racing mirror. J45, hood pin tie downs. N41, dual exhaust. N42, bright exhaust tips. N85, 8,000 RPM tachometer. P37, power convertible top. R11, AM music master radio. V6X, black longitudinal stripe. Y05, build to US specifications. EN1, that is the end of the sales code, and unfortunately, the end of this week's autopsy report.
You want to know why I know, sir? Why I'm going to punch out at 53 like Gandolfini? Because that this intake manifold's on backwards. I just came out to check in on everybody and see how it was going. And something didn't quite look right to me, but that's over there. Not unusual. But it turns out Doug, in his crack shop ploy to train our new guy the right way, put the intake manifold on backwards. So he's turning that around now.
Well, I have learned that if I'm firing up an engine that Dougie gave me, to move the distributor 180 degrees before I start trying to fire it up.
And put the brackets on that I forgot to put on.
Well,
Hey, I like that, Mark.
That'll go on just fine like
That'll
that.
be perfect.
It'll match the intake manifold.
Remember how I said this is the back of the manifold?
My
I do
mom
remember
used
you
to
saying
say,
that, and then you
Dougie's
talked
a
yourself out of it.
simpleton. I'd say, well, he's not a simpleton, he's a sweet guy. That doesn't mean he's not a simpleton. And she's got a point. Got a point.
All I can say is I love Dougie. He knows his stuff, and hey, we all make mistakes.
Okay.
All right, Dougie, we ready for the valve covers?
We are ready for the valve covers.
Sweet.
So I bequeath unto you
Thank you very much.
the driver's side valve.
So probably one of the most important engines we've ever started. Maybe Wendell's numbers matching Hemi was as important, but this is very experimental. It had to be started right away. One of the things I told Doug and Brian was the minute that you get that thing put together, please get it on the engine run stand. There are things I need to know now. One is I got to make a phone call to the owner. This is an additional almost $20,000 went into saving this engine. But again, now the Cuda, instead of being a $100,000 car when it's done with a non-numbers engine, is $150 because it's got its numbers in it. So the math's there.
I got to tell you, being an old Chevy guy and now building a Mopar engine, Mopar had a few things figured out, didn't they?
Yeah.
And then we're pretty close to running this thing, right?
Well, we have to put the exhaust manifolds on first.
Exhaust manifolds, all right.
I am so glad to have your help.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Dougie.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
sir. There it is. All right,
We're going to fire this up pretty soon.
let's do it.
Stay tuned. Will the Ghoul's gamble pay off?
If this works, the customer will be happy to pay the extra money to save a very rare numbers matching 71 Cuda.
Or will this 71 Cuda's budget end up grenading like the engine?
It's all up to that engine running and sustaining.
Could Mark's engine experiment wind up making this car worth tens of thousands more? Or put the owner, the shop, and the engine in the red?
You're starting to go up.
Always kind of expect the bad to happen, and it did.
4.
Oh, there she
careful.
goes.
Coming up, when Graveyard Cars returns.
Let's face it, they're going to drive this car. It's not just going to be sitting there in the garage for 5 minutes and say, ooh, we got the numbers matching engine. Okay, good job putting it together.
Thank you,
Job,
Mark.
I liked your intake manifold.
thank you.
idea, Doug.
Thank you.
Yeah, high five each other.
Oh, sorry.
I love the intake manifold. I loved all that. That was good stuff. Got a chance to see that. I thought I'd bring you two guys out here to hear it run. See the fruits of your labor. All right, so I'm going to give it some coil power. You got the distributor in backwards?
Yeah.
There we go.
I know Mark wagered a lot on this engine being salvageable, so I'm as nervous as he is about running this engine and hoping that we don't have any strange noises or leaks or overheating issues. I know if this works, the customer will be happy to pay the extra money to save a very rare numbers matching 71 Cuda.
Okay, I feel better already.
Yeah, me too.
Oh.
Could you have the cam off a little bit? That's kind of part of your repertoire.
Wow, dude. I don't believe it.
The thing is starting up really nicely. It runs good for an initial fire up. The true test is time. It has to run on that engine stand. It has to run for 15 or 20 minutes. We've got to check the oil pressure. We've got to make sure it's not overheating. We've got to make sure we're not losing oil or water anywhere internally, causing a milkshake in the crankshaft or something. It's all up to that engine running and sustaining, because let's face it, they're going to drive this car. It's not just going to be sitting there in the garage for 5 minutes and say, ooh, we got the numbers matching engine. 80 pounds of oil pressure.
So our biggest concern is not that it just runs, but that it is a functional engine and it will hold water and oil pressure. So we have to let it run long enough to open up the thermostat, get it up to operating temperature, and watch for water or oil leaks.
That is amazing.
That sounds awesome, dude.
Man.
Little lifter noise.
Uh-huh.
I agree with the guys. This was a monumental build and engine fire up. A lot at stake here, so I was really glad I got to be a part of it.
How's our water in the radiator look?
Pretty good.
80 pounds of oil pressure. Temperature's starting to go up. Sounds really nice. Any leaks, squeaks,
I haven't
rattles,
seen
knocks,
anything.
clicks? I'll tell you, this is huge, and it's huge because you would not believe how many good cars don't have their original engines because of freeze cracks or windowing.
So far, so good. We had great oil pressure and no leaks.
And I'm not saying we can fix every one. That's the worst one on the planet. So you got a 70 Hemi Cuda, you got the original engine, but it has a hole in the side of the block.
Right.
We got the guys that can fix it.
Yep,
That
it
just
is.
changed the
It
value
is.
by $20,000 on this car. Everything is running just like it should. 185 degrees at the thermostat.
Nice.
Beautiful. Best running little engine we've had in a while.
Yeah.
Our audience is dead. They're only 76 degrees.
Man.
Old Pete's running about 86 in that yapper ahead. I'm innocently minding my own business, checking temperatures, and all of a sudden, oh, careful!
Nice.
Twice.
You know, you learn a lot of things here at Graveyard Cars, and one of the things I've learned is I've got to have cat-like reflexes.
Did it get you?
Yeah.
At least it's only 185 and it's not 250. No extra charge for that, gentlemen. Now, the good news about that happening is I didn't get hit by it this time. Brian got hit, because again, another rite of passage, right? He'll know in the future not to be that close to something Dougie's put a hose clamp on. All just good, creative ways to teach somebody what not to do. Remember the bone collector? Yeah? Remember that? Denzel Washington, right? Undoes that pipe, that steam pipe, turns it over there, boils her face off. You think she's gonna make the same mistake next time? No. You think Brian's gonna trust him to lock down a clamp next time? No. This is good stuff. These are learning moments. Now, who do we have to thank for tightening that hose down?
I don't know.
Let's run through the gamut.
Let's
Pete, did you
see.
tighten that hose down? No, sir. You tighten that hose down where
no,
it goes on
sir.
the radiator?
No.
Who does
I
that-
didn't tighten it down.
Nobody tightened it down.
Oh, it tightened itself down.
I don't know.
Well, this is a miracle.
Yeah?
You never checked it.
I don't know.
You got a good close-up on that?
Let me check it.
Get a
okay?
real
Let-
good,
let-
that's the look of a guilty man right there. That's that same look when they said, Ted, what'd you do with that kid? Nothing. I just found her in the dumpster. No. It's a cash and carry world. Sometimes you pay a little, mostly you pay a lot. Sometimes you pay all you have. And that's Stephen King. So I'm glad it was your side.
I bet you were. Well, where am I going
And
to
Doug,
stand,
you're
Mark?
never allowed to do that again.